Good evening, my name is Jay Butcher. I'm the Communications Manager here at LICC, and it's my privilege to welcome you here tonight to St Peter's, the home of the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity. It's great to see the hall so full this evening, and I hope you're all sitting comfortably, and also to welcome you who are joining us from all over the UK via live stream. We do hope that you feel part of this evening as well. For those of us here in London, if there should be a fire, please walk calmly out of the way that you have come, or there is also a fire exit to your left, my right. And if you haven't found the facilities, they're back through the double doors into the reception area, gentlemen to the left, ladies to the right. For those of you who are live streaming, I assume you know where your bathrooms are. And if there is a fire, please don't feel the need to run out into the street in solidarity. So to tonight, in just a moment, I'm going to hand over to Jim, who will be speaking to us for up to an hour. And then we'll take a short break where hopefully you can think and mull on what he has shared. We'll come back and we'll take some questions together on his presentation. We will have a runner or two with some microphones, so please don't feel that you have to shout. We'll make sure that you are loud and clear. And for those who are live streaming, you can also enter questions either through the live stream system or via Twitter. If you are tweeting tonight, you can follow us. Our handle is @LICCLTD, or you can use tonight's hashtag, which is Common Good. Now, Jim is well known as President and Editor-in-Chief of Sojourners. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He's a public theologian, speaker, and international commentator on ethics and public life. And it's a pleasure to welcome him back here to LICC. We have a number of copies of his latest work, On God's Side, available to purchase after he speaks, and he'll also be doing a signing as well at the end. Now, this book was written during a sabbatical period. It's not about politics in the narrow sense, rather about how we as the church might engage our personal and our public lives with the ancient idea of the common good. As Jim explores the biblical and theological roots of this idea and then seeks to apply it to the fundamental questions that society asks, questions around economic trust, democratic engagement, globalization, conflict resolution, to name a few, and also how our faith can contribute to the common good within our now global village. The book's message is that when people of faith actually say and do the things that their faith stands for, two things happen. Firstly, people are surprised. And secondly, they are attracted. In On God's Side, Jim has written a book that has the potential to spark a national conversation around the meaning of the common good. Families, jobs, livelihoods, churches, personal, public witness in the world. And whilst the book is contextually set within the US, we've asked Jim to recast his thoughts here tonight through a UK lens. Throughout the 40 years that Sojourners has been running, Jim has had unique access as a Christian leader to the high-level political and economic figures of our world, policy discussions both at national and international levels. He recently served on the White House Advisory Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, and he currently serves, although he admitted earlier on to me how he's not quite sure why they keep inviting him back, as the chair of the Global Agenda Council on Values of the World Economic Forum. But Jim doesn't see just see lobbying those as power as the solution. He's passionate about seeing the church reimagining public life. His phrase of holding the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other echoes the call of LICC's founder, John Stott, the church to engage in double listening in order to relate the Word of God to today's world. Indeed, this way of thinking undergirds all of our own work here at LICC, equipping ordinary Christians to love God, serve one another, and to be witnesses to Christ in the whole of their lives, not just on a Sunday, but Monday through Saturday as well. As you sat down, you will have found our latest edition of EG, sitting on your chairs, waiting for you, just waiting for you. We hope that the testimonies included in that magazine might inspire you or cause you to pass them on to someone who might benefit. You'll have also found, nicely slotted inside that magazine, a copy of the forthcoming events here at LICC, a small postcard prayer for London. We do hope that you will join us in a hearty Amen with us on, and a little red card which enables you to stay up to date on our email list, but also gives you the opportunity to financially support the work of LICC. And so, as I welcome Jim, may I offer up these words of prayer. Heavenly Father, take the words of our brother Jim and speak through them. Take our ears so that we might hear you through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you. And as Jim speaks, may you speak, and may Jesus be glorified. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, would you welcome with me Jim Wallis?
It's great to be back at LICC and to have a suite on the podium here. So here you go. There you go. Jay, that was a great summary of the book. It was. I mean, sometimes in a book tour and a TV or radio producer will say, "So tell us about your latest book," which means they haven't even looked at it, you know. But that was a great summary, so I thank you for paying attention. LICC is an important forum, has been for a long time, important place. I'm very happy to come back here again. I'm here, I was at Greenbelt, and I'm here on a bit of a book tour. But Greenbelt is a great place for me because I met Joy Carroll there, who is my beloved wife, and she's known in Britain as the real Vicar of Dibley, because she helped with the script for Richard Curtis and Dawn French, and Dawn stays in touch with Joy. It's interesting, I was appreciative of hearing the first thing Dawn French asked of Joy when she and Richard showed up at the house. They had this new show, Vicar. They had no idea what it would be like to be a woman vicar, so they stalked Joy to get her to help. And Dawn had her box of chocolates and Richard Curtis, and she didn't say, "How do you do this? What do you wear?" She said, "Why would a young, modern woman even want to be a Christian, let alone a priest?" That was the beginning of a long conversation, which I think ties to what the vocation of this place is here. At Greenbelt, Joy and I met there, and then we brought back our son, Luke. He was 4 years old. On Sunday, Joy's celebrating communion, and here's Luke. He's 4 years old, looking around, 20,000 people, and mom's up there breaking the bread, and he said, "Dad, are men allowed to do that?" Greenbelt is a place that I like because, as Gandhi once said, Gandhi wanted us to experiment with the truth, he said. Experiment with the truth. Greenbelt is where they experiment with the gospel. And I think that's your vocation. What does the gospel mean in relationship to our lives and our work? That's what this book is about. I have to say, coming in and seeing all the books of John Stott, it just really touched me. I've been at the BBC seemingly every day. I've been here, and BBC is right down by All Souls. So I'm walking in the BBC, different hours of the day, and I see that church, and I'm reminded of all the wonderful times I got to be there and visit with John Stott, and what he meant to so many of us. And I thought I would just tell a little story that I've never written about how I met John Stott, that might be relevant to our conversation tonight. I was at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and we had a little group of us that were called the Radicals, because we were trying to apply the gospel to our times and to the world. And John was a visiting faculty member in a fall, and I was off that fall doing some activist work, and I heard that John Stott wanted to meet with the Radicals. Well, I thought, gee, John Stott, he's this very famous, established evangelical. He wants to hear from us. So he invited us into his little apartment at Trinity. And there he is, looking very much like an established evangelical lecturer. And I was there with my very long hair and blue jeans and work shirt on. And you know what? I wanted him to hear what things were like in the U.S., about Vietnam, about racism, about economic injustice. I want him to know what's going on here. And he's probably never heard this before, and I wanted to make sure he understood how bad things are and how we need to change all this. And so they said, now, Jim, you started, and he said, so, Jim, tell me about what you want to do. And so I started. I told him about Vietnam. I told him about, the movement. I told him about the inner city. I told him about racism. I told him about, and how I've been, beat up by the police and arrested. And I went on and on. It was such a long talk. And it was very radical stuff. And how I came to Jesus Christ, and how Matthew 25 was my conversion text. I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was naked, I was a stranger, I was sick, I was in prison, Jesus said, and you didn't come to me. And that's what I've heard from the church all these years. And Jesus said, as you've done the least of these, you've done to me. And I said, that converted me. More radical than Ho Chi Minh, Karl Marx, Che Guevara. I went on and on and on about this radical gospel. Finally, I couldn't think of anything else to say. And he had been listening, patiently, quietly, and he said, are you finished? I said, yeah, I think I am. He stood up, walked across the room, came over and stood in front of me in the way that makes you need to stand up to meet someone. And he put his arms on my shoulders, and we were a ragtag group of seminarians. We were nothings and nobodies and just these radical disciples who had caught on fire with the gospel. And he looked at me and he said, I believe that what you're going to do is going to make an impact for the kingdom of God. And so I want to help you in any way that I can. Feel free to use my name, or call on me, or anything I can do to help you, just let me know. And I was just stunned. Here is the great John Stott telling a bunch of nobodies who were just ranting about how bad the world was and how much the gospel could change it. And he became a contributing editor to our little publication. And he'd come visit us in Washington, D.C., in the worst neighborhood, violent, poor neighborhood. And here's John getting out of a cab, coming into our little house in the middle of the ghetto, sitting with us for hours, talking about Christian faith and what it means to live it in the world. And he was not hesitant to engage and agree and disagree, theological discussion, deep discussion, and it was a wonderful time we'd have together. Then he needed to go back to his hotel, so I'd take him out in the street, and it was tough. It was bullets flying every night, and here's this very English-looking guy in a suit, and I was so worried about him. So I went out there myself, I cleared the path, and I'd pull up a cab, and I says, now, you're going to take my friend right back to his hotel. No stops along the way. Okay, you got him? I'm going to hold you responsible for this guy. And I put him in the cab, make sure he's okay, and send him back to his hotel. But he would come, and he would do that when he visited Washington, D.C. What do you learn there about a leader who decides to mentor young leaders and take a chance on them? Take a chance on them. We weren't safe. We could have become anything or done anything or said anything, and his name would have been on our masthead. He took a chance on us. He invested in us. And that's what leaders need to do. Mentoring a whole new generation of young leaders and taking a chance on them. So it's a very moving thing for me to come in and see his picture on those books and to see All Souls. Every time we go to the BBC talk about putting the gospel in practice, whether it be in our streets or in Syria, I remember John Stott. So grateful to John Stott. So, little quiz. What is the fastest growing religious affiliation, would you suspect, in America? Fastest growing group. Check the boxes. I am this, or that. What's the fastest growing religious affiliation now in America? Quiz. Muslims? Nope. None of the above. None of the above. Checking. None of the above. Fastest growing in the U.S. I love the nuns. I love the nuns. Now, I love the other nuns, too. The N-U-N-S. In fact, when I would go out to speak in those days at these very conservative, evangelical Christian colleges to talk about justice, it was like being a voice in the wilderness, being in the lion's den, but I liked being in the lion's den. So I'd go out there and I'd walk in, there'd be 2 rows of Catholic sisters in their full garb. And I'd say, "Sisters, why are you here?" They would say, "Well, we're local." I said, "Well, I know you're local, but why are you in this place?" "Well, this is a very conservative place, Jim, and we heard you were coming, so we thought somebody should have your back." So I had nuns as bodyguards for years, So I love those nuns. But the N-O-N-E-S, they're mostly young people. What's interesting is most of them believe in God. That's what they say. They just don't want to affiliate with religion because of what we say or don't say, do or don't do. They don't want to affiliate. We've been really blessed in this week, 10 days, all the young people who are coming to these events. Often we went to Belfast and Edinburgh and Manchester, Greenbelt, and now here. And several times, a young person comes up afterwards and says, "I have not been to a church, around church in 10 years. But I wanted to come tonight, and what I heard tonight makes me want to engage again. I want to think about this again." Sometimes they're the children of the people planning the events. And they haven't come anywhere near the church in years. And now they're coming back because this new generation, half my staff is under 30. I'm in my 60s, but we're really lucky because every time we go out to speak, half the crowd is under 30, everywhere we go. And they want their lives to make a difference in the world. If they're people of faith, they want their faith to make a difference in the world. We are foolish if we think that what happens inside our churches is what will draw people into them. Music, preaching, liturgy. What happens inside the doors of our churches is not going to bring people in. What we do outside the doors of our churches is what will bring people into our churches. I was with someone at Greenbelt who has studied Pope Francis now and written a book, Paul Vallely, a new book out, worth reading. And he said that the speech that Pope Francis gave in the conclave, some of them gave 3.5-minute talks. What he said was he's decided that when Jesus says, "I stand at the door and knock," you know that old text, I was taught that mean he's standing at the door of our hearts and he's knocking. Let him in, let him in, let him in. Pope Francis said, no, I think he's standing inside the church, at the door of the church, knocking, trying to get out of the church and take the Christians with him out into the streets. My theology of the Incarnation is that in Jesus Christ, God hits the streets. So I did take the sabbatical to write this book, and my discipline was for 3 months, not to speak or write or be interviewed about about the political narrative or news cycle. The first 3 months of the election year, which was a tough discipline for me, but we did. And every morning I'd get up early, and then exercise, then all day read and think and write and pray. And at night, though, I would often watch the news cycle after a long day of work. And the more I was disengaged from it, and the more I watched it, the more depressing it seemed to me. The polarization, everything politicized, the anger, the hatred, the vitriol, and the blaming. People in power, I've listened all week here, people in power who run our countries, they blame instead of solve. They take a problem and they want to make us afraid of it and then blame it on the other side. They also don't govern, they just want to win. Winning instead of governing, blaming instead of solving is now a way of life. What they have lost, I finally realized at a deep level, was this ancient idea called the common good. Now, it's in Catholic social teaching, it's in black churches, it's in Judaism, Islam, it's in Desmond Tutu's notion of Ubuntu in South Africa. It's the theologians say it's the networks and conditions of life that allow for human flourishing, how to be human, how to live a human life. Now, this ancient common good goes way back, and here's what I found. This quote is worth reading to you briefly. It says, "This is the rule of the most perfect Christianity, its most exact definition, its highest point, namely the seeking of the common good. For nothing can so make a person an imitator of Christ as caring for his neighbors." You know who said that? John Chrysostom, 347 to 407 AD. Goes back a long way. Now, we can have that conversation in the public square with people who aren't Christians, and we do, and they talk about the need to rise above politics, and they talk about the golden rule and treat others as you would want them to treat you and so on. All that's good, but for us, there's a deeper spiritual foundation to this. They said to Jesus, "So what do you want us to do?" He said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." Love your neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Hillel was once asked to stand on one foot and describe the essence of Judaism. He couldn't talk long, standing on one foot. He said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." I just finished 3 weeks of vacation with Joy and my two boys, Luke, who's 15, and Jack, who's 10. 3 weeks with nothing to do but just be with them. And I found myself often just gazing at them. And those of you who are parents will know what I mean when I say, I just sometimes feel like I just didn't know I could ever love that much. Anyone, anything, I just was gazing at them and just realized how much I love those two boys. And as I've been thinking about this idea of the common good, it struck me one day that what that means, love your neighbor as yourself, it means that I need to love other people's kids like I love my own. That's a transformational ethic, and it was supposed to be. What does that mean, to love our neighbor as ourselves? And so what I go through in the book is, this is the most biblical, theological book I've written for some time, and I talk about First of all, I was at the monastery, the Camaldolese monastery, where they don't talk. You can't talk at all, and you can't talk to other guests. And for a week, I was with the monks. The only noise all day is the monks at prayer. You're with them all day at prayer, but other than that, there's no talking. But in the kitchen was, on the bottom, old beat-up set of the Chronicles of Narnia. So one day, I just picked up Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Of course, I've read them all. Let me read it again just for fun. I read it that afternoon. I read all the Chronicles all over again in that week. And I hadn't read them for a while to my kids and so on. And I felt sometimes up in that mountain that Aslan was walking right along beside you, as in the Chronicles he does. This Christ figure, who really is almost archetypal as seeking the common good of Narnia and all of its creatures. All of its creatures. There's a chapter called The Lion, the Word, and the Way in this book, which is my chapter about Narnia and the common good. But then it goes into this, who Jesus is and why it matters. Who Jesus is matters. Last Wednesday was a big day for me. 50th anniversary of a speech by a young black minister, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who gave a speech at the Lincoln Memorial. The cover of his book is a picture of the Lincoln Memorial, my favorite monument. And King gave a speech, and it was, I have a complaint. Oh no, that wasn't it. We have grievances and complaints. Politics is full of that protest and special interest. I have a complaint. No, he said, I have a dream. Complaints don't spark movements, but dreams do. I was a white kid in a white school in a white church, and I listened to him. That speech changed my country. It changed the world, and it changed my life. The dream wasn't just about voting rights and civil rights. It was what he called, and I have a chapter on this in the book, it's what he called the beloved community. The beloved community. That all of us are equal in the eyes of God. God loves all of his children. And when we fight for that, when we live for that, when we try to make that real in the world, that's what it means to be on God's side. I love Lincoln's quote. It says, it's on the front of the book, it says, my concern is not whether God is on our side. That's the mistake that religion and politics make all the time, bringing God onto our side. God agrees with me and my tribe and my bubble and my class, my group, my nation. Lincoln says, no, my greatest concern is to be on God's side. Now, Lincoln was not a president who used religion for his political purposes. He struggled with his faith. He often didn't know what it meant to be on God's side. He wrestled with that. He flipped the question. Don't say God is on your side. Ask, wrestle, pray what it means to be on God's side. I think to serve the common good is to be on God's side. And so I try to apply the common good to fundamental things like economy, what I call the uneconomy. Unfair, unstable, unsustainable, and making people unhappy. The uneconomy. How do you build economic trust? We're talking to business people and people in the workplace, people at Davos. I was with Occupy Wall Street in their second week. I was here at St. Paul's, actually, Occupy London. But days later, I'm at the World Economic Forum. You go from the cement of New York to five-star hotels. The questions were the same. We've lost trust in how economic decisions are being made, who's making decisions and how. We've lost trust. How do you restore economic trust? That's the common good question. Or practically, we had a meeting in D.C. about the Congo, about minerals in the Congo that are being used to make our cell phones. These were NGOs and CEOs, not a Christian group, and I was their religious lunch speaker, which means you got to inspire them over their bad sandwiches, And so I said, all right, take out your cell phones. I said, no, I mean it. Take them out. Take your cell phones out. Hold them up. So they did. I said, this is your significant other. A lot of you. I mean, you spend more time with this than anybody, anything. I said that in San Diego, and this woman says to her, that's you, dear. He's talking about you, So then I read them the Good Samaritan parable. This is a secular group, but they knew the story, right? I said, now a lawyer asks Jesus a question. Who is my neighbor? Now, what you don't know about the story, this lawyer was a Washington lawyer. I know that tone of voice, It wasn't, Jay, who is my neighbor? How can I help? It was, all right, just who is my neighbor? And who am I responsible for? Jesus said, well, there was this guy, he was robbed, beaten, and left on the road to die, and the religious leaders walked past him. But then this other person came along from a different race, different region, different ethnicity, a stranger, and he helped the man. He's called the Good Samaritan. Jesus says, go and do that. That's what I mean by your neighbor. So I said, okay, whoever helped make this cell phone, whoever lives were impacted by making your cell phone, that person is your neighbor. Globally, that person is not your neighbor. So let's talk about turning supply chains into value chains. They stop talking, stop eating, and we got to talk. Supply chains. I'm talking to business people about their supply chains. When I was on the book tour, a factory collapsed in Bangladesh, making our clothes, and the people were all killed making our clothes. Are they our neighbor? Yes, they are. So a chapter is the Good Samaritan goes global. What does that mean? Love our neighbor. What does that mean? Or all week they've been asking me here about Syria. We can talk about that in the Q&A if you want. And terrorism and violence and all that stuff and drones and all that stuff. And so here's a story about what it means to love your neighbor. In Tennessee, the Bible Belt in the South, very famous around the world. In Tennessee, the state legislature passed a law, an anti-Sharia law in Tennessee, because Sharia is a serious threat in Tennessee. Sharia law. It's about to take over the state. All these Southern Baptists, they want to follow Sharia law, and they had to pass a law to keep the state safe from Sharia law in Tennessee. What that did was give permission to a lot of people to do violence against Muslims. Personal attacks, graffiti, attacking a mosque, making people afraid, all over Tennessee. Except one little town in Tennessee, one little suburb of Memphis, the pastor heard that the Memphis Islamic Cultural Center was coming to his neighborhood, his church's neighborhood. They're moving right across the street. What am I going to do? What am I going to do as a Christian? What should I do about this? Well, he prayed about it. And his church, Heart Song Church, put up a sign on the front lawn. Heart Song Church welcomes Memphis Islamic Cultural Center, front lawn, the church. The Muslims were astonished. They came by in 2 days and said, are you the pastor? He says, yeah. We are hoping to be ignored. But why did you welcome us? Why did you do this? That's never happened to us before. Well, Jesus said we should love our neighbors, and here you are, neighbor. I hear you're our neighbor. Welcome. We don't know much about Islam. We'd like to learn more, but welcome. Kids start playing together. They began to tutor homeless kids together. The barbecue began to include halal meat. And they got to know each other, and we were in the middle of all this violence. And every night, the media loves conflict, right? So what they talked about was this church in Florida, alleged church in Florida, with an alleged pastor named Terry Jones, who I think had 13 members in his church. I didn't know anybody in Florida who knew this guy, but he said he's going to burn Qurans, a bonfire of Qurans. So he became famous all over the world. People got killed because of this. But my friends in Heart Song, those stories, lots of things. So I finally persuaded CNN, tell a positive story. And they told the story of Heart Song Church. So here's the imam and the pastor side by side on CNN Sunday morning. And you could tell they knew each other. You could tell they respected each other. You could tell they even liked each other. And I wept that Sunday morning because I've been on TV all week trying to say, no. You shouldn't burn Qurans. And my friends are being attacked. They're not terrorists, really. And I called Steve, thank you. I felt so proud today, or Sunday, to be a Christian. He said, can I tell you what happened last night? I said, yeah. Well, he said, I got a call from Pakistan, a room full of men in Pakistan, in Kashmir, Pakistan, one of the most conflicted places in the world. They said, is this the pastor? I said, yes. We're calling from Pakistan. We're a room full of men, Muslim men. We saw the CNN segment. We all watched it. We were silent for a long time. Finally, one of us said, I think God may be speaking to us through this man. Another one said, how can we kill these people? Another one who can't take, doesn't speak English, but I'll tell you, he went out to the little Christian church near our mosque, and with his Muslim hands, he washed and scrubbed that church clean. Now we're all back in this room, it's 1:30 a.m., to tell you, Pastor, tell your congregation, we don't hate them. Tell them we love them. And because of what you've done, we're going to take care of that little Christian church for the rest of our lives. So what works better, drones in Pakistan or loving our neighbors as ourselves? This is practical stuff. This stuff really does. We live the way we do because when Jesus came, as John Stott would try to say over and over again, he came announcing a new order of things called the kingdom of God. And that kingdom was meant to change the world and us with it. Everything, personally, spiritually, economically, socially. I've got 2 chapters on that in the book. This is what I call the gospel of the kingdom versus the atonement-only gospel. Just me and the Lord, not the world. There's a series called The Bible that's been popular in the U.S., coming here, I think, in the fall on TV4. And so the people in Hollywood, 2 Christians in Hollywood, made this very dramatic. Kids love the acting out the Bible stories. So they sent me the tapes to review it and give them comments. So I did. And the one I liked best was Jesus is by the Sea of Galilee. And there's Peter out fishing. And Jesus wants to meet him. And so he walks into the water, right out to the boat, and he crawls in. And Peter says, who is this guy? What's he doing? What does he want? Jesus says, cast your net over the side. Peter says, but there's no fish today. He says, just trust me, cast the net, put it over the side. He does, you know the story. The net fills with fish again and again. Peter says, how'd you do that? Jesus doesn't answer the question. He says, follow me, and I'll make you a fisher of men and women. And Peter asks this great question, what are we going to do? I love that. What are we going to do? And then Jesus' character says, change the world. Change the world. What if he just said, what are we going to do? Jesus says, well, save a few people from hell and judge all the others. That's going to fly. There's a movement there, that's for sure. The producers came to D.C. to premiere the film, and they wanted to talk, and they sat me down and said, did we get that change the world thing? Because it isn't in the text, but we thought that's what it was about, change the world. I said, you got it right. You got it right. I was 14 years old in Detroit. I'd heard that speech by a king. And a church elder said to me, Jim, you got to understand, Christianity has nothing to do with racism. That's political. Our faith is personal. And that's the night that I left in my head and my heart. And in 2 years, I was gone. In the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, I came back to faith when I read these Gospels that said he came to bring a new order of things that would reverse the social order. And when we live that way, it contributes to the common good, makes it possible. That's what we do. A whole new generation wants that, and that's why they're coming. They want to change the world, and they want to hear that we do too. And I'll just say this. After being here for almost 10 days and listening to the responses from people, there's one thing that I'm now zeroing in on. It's what I call the difference between skepticism, which is healthy. I've known your leaders of church and state in this country and at home, and I want to encourage skepticism of parliaments and politics. And even I had a wonderful 2 hours with Justin Welby this week. Met him talk for the first time. He would say, too, be skeptical, right, of even the church. Skepticism is a good thing, but you know what? Cynicism is a spiritually dangerous thing. And there is this famous British cynicism that I want to say, be careful. Because cynicism makes you say, nothing is going to change, so I'll stand back. Surround myself with more security. I won't take chances. I won't risk anything. I'll just stand back. And we give up on making the commitments that changed the world. 250,000 people came to Washington to hear King speak. Most of them had already made that commitment. They'd paid the price for it. They came and they knew that change is not because of a speech, it's because of their personal commitments. And then they were given this dream. They went home to implement it, and some of them gave their lives, including Dr. King gave his life for this. My Bible says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. My best paraphrase of that is, hope means believing in spite of the evidence, then watching the evidence change. I sat at Holy Trinity Church, Clapham, Sunday night to preach, room full of young people, but they were starting with cynicism, and I'm right there next to the pulpit in the church where Wilberforce went to church for 30 years. John Newton preached up there. There are pulpits that have changed the world. That's one of them. I got to preach in John Wesley's pulpit in London, and I'm sitting there. This pulpit changed the world. I got to preach in Dr. King's pulpit, Ebenezer Church, Atlanta, Georgia, a pulpit that has changed the world. Pulpits can change the world. How can you sit at Holy Trinity, Clapham, and be cynical about changing the world when you're in William Wilberforce's church? The movie Amazing Grace, you probably saw it. It was too much about the man, great movie, the man, but not about the movement. He said he introduced his anti-slavery legislation, and they laughed at him, 30 years later, they gave him a standing ovation in the end of the movie, It was a prairie fire of revival that swept your nation and made Wilberforce possible. Is this possible now? Yes, it's happening right now in Washington, D.C., where they're doing nothing, the politicians, nothing at all, accomplishing almost nothing, except one thing you're going to hear about probably in the next month or two. There's going to be a bill that's going to pass. It's about comprehensive immigration reform. It'll change the lives of 11 million undocumented people, and the White House will tell you, and the Democrats will tell you, and the Republicans will tell you that if it passes, it's because of the faith community, period. Evangelical Christians read Matthew 25, and they realized how they treat the stranger, those 11 million immigrants, is how we treat Christ himself. And the Bible thumpers became Bible readers. And the word ger, G-E-R, the stranger, appears in the Old Testament 92 times. And we had people studying Scripture every day in their churches with their pastors and with their members of Congress, some of them, and 200,000 people are praying for reform. And we are talking to Republicans and Democrats and getting them to work together to pass a bill to fix a broken system where 11 million people are being exploited. They're walking ATM machines for thugs and thieves. Women are raped and can't get help. They'll be deported. People are sick and can't get health care. People are victimized by violence, can't be protected because they'll be deported. They're deporting families and kids. Thousands of kids are in foster care because their parents have been deported. They're breaking up families, and we're saying, Wilberforce didn't just say, you Christians, you shouldn't have slaves. He said we have to end a slave trade. Dr. King just didn't say, you Christians shouldn't discriminate and shouldn't let blacks eat at your lunch counter. He said we've got to end discrimination. You can't just take care of immigrants and try and meet their needs. You've got to fix a broken system. And Christians, I am so happy to say, are at the front lines of that movement. Gordon Brown once told me, direct quote, people like me and Tony Blair and Bill Clinton do not forgive the debt of the poorest countries in the world unless there is a movement like your church-based Jubilee 2000. That was your movement here. We joined it. That happened here in Britain. You made politicians change their minds. That's what's happening now. This can happen today, right now. And a new generation, as Jay said, when we actually do what our faith tells us to do, two things happen. People are surprised, and then they're attracted. So, very quickly, the end of the book has an epilogue. I want to make it simple. 10 personal decisions you can make for the common good. I mean, anyone can make these decisions. I'll be very brief. The book's about the decisions. These are the 10. If you're a father or a mother, make your children the most important priority in your life and build your other commitments around them. Why is a social justice advocate starting with parenting and children? Because I've learned that probably what we do with and for those who are closest to us in the households where we live may be one of the most important things we can do for the common good. The longest chapter is about healthy households, how to be parents, how to teach our kids what it means to live like this. If you're married, here's a justice advocate again talking about this household stuff. If you're married, be faithful to your spouse. Demonstrate your commitment with both your fidelity and your love. If you're single, measure your relationships by their integrity, not their usefulness. Let's start with those closest to us. If you're a person of faith, focus not just on what you believe, but on how you act on those beliefs. The people out there don't want us to tell them the doctrines we believe and why they should believe them, or what will happen to them if they don't believe what we believe. That will not change anyone anymore, but if we begin to live by what we say, they'll pay attention, and they'll wonder why we're living that way and what we believe, and then we can tell them. 4, take the place you live seriously. Make the context of your life the context, and work the parish that you take responsibility for. John Wesley said, "The world is my parish." That was a statement about the common good. St. Catherine's knows that these 19 square blocks are the responsibility of the parish, whether the people there are believers or not, 24/7. Church in Boston, a friend of mine, pastor, Saturday night, a kid gets shot to death, killed on the steps of the church, and nobody's there. And they have to pray through whether they're responsible for what happens on their steps when they're not there. They decided they were responsible for the steps and the streets and the city, and the black pastors went outside the door of the church where nobody was coming in from the streets to walk with the kids at night on the streets. And after 2 years, we reduced youth homicide by 70% in Boston. And the police chief said it's because of the pastors. Do what we say we believe. Don't just tell them what we believe. Seek to develop a vocation. Number 5, seek to develop a vocation and not just a career. I'm teaching a course, teaching it, I'm missing it this week, teaching it next week, starting at Georgetown. And my goal is halfway through the course, the class, half the way through, the papers and reflection are less about information, what they've read and what they think and what I said, what they think, and more about vocation. What am I going to do with my life? Career and vocation are very different things. Career is you assemble your assets, put them in a resume, try to find a ladder of ascent to success, start as high as you can. That's career. Vocation is not about assets, it's about gifts. What are your gifts? My students say, "What do you mean? How do I know my gifts?" What do you lose track of time when you're doing? What's that down deep gut, heart stuff? Where's your passion? What are you really good at? Where your gifts meet the crushing needs of this world, right there is your vocation. At that intersection, calling is more important than opportunities. Vocation, career, it's the difference. Make choices by distinguishing between wants and needs. Choose what is enough rather than what is possible to get. And for me, this is important for the kids. Teach your children the difference between appetites and values. The market economy, I think sometimes, is aimed at Luke and Jack to create appetites. Our households are places where they target us to increase our appetites. What if our households are, in fact, teaching the values that replace appetites? Starting with our kids. What does that mean? 7, look at the business. We talked about this. The business, the company, or the organization where you work from an ethical perspective. Ask what its vocation is too. Challenge what is dishonest, exploitive, and help your place of work do well by doing good. At Davos, I'll be having dinner with people, World Economic Forum, and they'll say, I love that plenary talk you gave today. It was really good. I love those values. Boy, it inspired me. And I said, where do you work? And they named, I won't say, but a large financial institution or something. And I'll say, didn't some of their products and practices help lead to the financial meltdown that so hurt so many people? Yeah. What happens when you go home and talk about that? Can't do that. don't know how to do that. We have to do that. What does it mean to hold the place? We spend, you were saying before, most of our time, our lives are spent at our workplace. Faith at work. 8, ask yourself, what in the world today most breaks your heart and offends your sense of justice? Decide to help change that and join with others who are committed to transforming the injustice. I go through several here. Take trafficking. There are more sexual slaves today than when Wilberforce freed the slaves 200 years ago. And they're not just all in Cambodia, they're right here in London. They're right in this neighborhood. Trust me. It's going on here, everywhere. Now, we can keep rescuing the women and children. We can keep rescuing them from the brothels. We can even give them work to do, micro-enterprise, all kind of stuff. That's all great. But if we're just rescuing the victims, we'll have a lot of work to do the rest of our lives because it'll keep growing. It's growing every day. All the language in the Bible, all the words for justice, often justice and righteousness are the same words. All the words for justice mean one thing: making things right. Making things right. I go through all that at great length, but just trust me, making things right is what it's about. So it means you want to do trafficking, end it. What men of power are supporting this? What money is supporting? Who's laundering that money? Who's protecting it? Who's profiting from it? You'll be surprised at the number of big banks that are involved and men of power. How do we change trafficking? How do we make things right? Education, homelessness, all the rest. How do you make things right? 9, get to know your political representatives at both the local and national level. Study the policy decisions. Examine their moral compass and public leadership. We sat with the Republicans and Democrats, and they looked at us in the eye and they said, let me be honest, we would normally deal with an immigration issue like this, any issue, in a way that would help us win the next election. But we're promising you we're not going to do that with this. We're going to do a bipartisan bill that actually will work to protect the lives of these 11 million people, because that's what you're asking us to do. It feels like we're holding their hands to allow them to do the right thing. Politicians need 2 things: moral courage, yes, but also political space. Create the space for them to do something. King came home from getting his Nobel Peace Prize. Went to see Lyndon Johnson, the president. He said, okay, now we have a civil rights law. That's why he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Now we need a Voting Rights Act. Johnson says, I can't do that. I've cashed in all my credit with the Southern senators. I've got no political capital left. It'll take me 5 years or 10 years to get you a Voting Rights Act. King said, we can't wait 5 or 10 years. If we can't vote in the South, we can't even implement the civil rights law. Johnson, the master of politics, says to the nation's moral leader, I can't do it. It isn't possible. King was not one to quit or withdraw or whine and complain. He organized in a place nobody heard of, called Selma, Alabama. And they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Sheriff Jim Clark and his thugs beat almost to death these young black activists. One of them now is my friend John Lewis, member of Congress, 80 years old. It was called Bloody Sunday. And in 2 weeks, the whole faith community came down and marched from Selma to Montgomery. The whole nation focused on that. In 5 months, we had a Voting Rights Act. Not 5 years, 5 months. Because King did what I think we should all do. The politicians in London and Washington, you can tell who they are always, because they're usually men in suits and ties, some women, but mostly men walking around with their fingers in the air. and they lick their finger to see which way the wind is blowing. King knew, Wood, of course, knew, Gandhi knew you don't change a country by replacing one wet-fingered politician with another. You have to change the wind. Change the wind. And they respond when you change the wind. We're not lobbyists, we are wind changers. King was a wind, we changed the culture, changed the conversation, changed the wind, and then they respond. Get to know them, and they'll get to know you as wind changers. Finally, since the difference between events and movements, is sacrifice, which also is the true meaning of religion and what makes for social change. So ask yourself, what is important enough? What is important enough to give your life to and for? Dr. King said something that just stays with me all the time. He says, if there's nothing you're willing to die for, then your life probably isn't worth living. What's worth giving our lives to and for? What's the dream? What's the dream, and are we willing to live that dream? I believe that people of faith, simply by acting on their faith, this room is so full of gifts and extraordinary commitments and people, and to gather up what is in this room and put it to work for the common good would change this city. It really would. And then what happens is people see what we're doing. Peter said, always be willing to give reason for the faith and hope that's within you. When he says that, he's assuming they're asking a question. Why do you Christians live the way you live? Why do you people live like you do? You don't live like we do. And they didn't. There was no poor among them, the early church. No poor. And the poor came to them. And they treated women with respect, as Jesus did. And Jews and Gentiles were being racially reconciled. There was no bond or free Jew or Gentile, male or female. The divisions of class and gender and race were being overcome by Jesus Christ. And they were called atheists by the Roman Empire because they wouldn't worship their gods, and they wouldn't serve in their army for 300 years, the Christians. And so people said, why do you live that way? Peter said, get ready now. They're going to ask you. Get ready to give reason for the faith and hope that's within you. The problem is, when nobody's asking us the question, why do you live the way you live? Our evangelism becomes an effort to somehow seem relevant. When nobody's asking us why we live the way we do. Well, we can make you prosperous. We can make you happy. We can find you somebody to date on our young people's nights. We'll do something. But they're not asking, when our sociology overcomes our theology, we're in trouble. Most American Christians are Americans first. Christians second, third, or fourth. Most American Christians, often they're white people first. Or they're middle class people, or suburban people, or Republicans, or Presbyterians. What does it mean to be Christians first in everything that we do? But I am very hopeful a new generation is rising up, and they want this. And when they see it, they're drawn to it. And in these 10 days in Britain, we're even crowds of young people, and they're drawn to this. This is what they want. I think the common good is something we're so hungry for in our public life. The opening line of the book says it well, and I'll end with this. Our life together can be better. That's the hunger. And if we make our life together better, people will say, why do you people live the way you do? And then we can tell them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Wonderful. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. So please do feel free to make use of the facilities. I believe there's going to be more tea and coffee and other drinks. If you do want to have drinks, can I suggest you go through the double doors and back in through this way so we have some sort of a one-way system. Might be helpful. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Please do think about some questions you might want to ask Jim, anything about the book or anything else that he's been speaking about tonight. That'd be great. So we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes. Thank you.